Yeah, these are two very fast, very offensive teams, and it looks like we're going to see that right from the jump as Yutaro leads the Tornadus and the Regidrago against Ben's Tornadus and Urshifu. I give a little bit of an edge to Yutaro at this point, just because you have that Regidrago that can resist those water-type moves coming out from Ben's Urshifu, but it's going to be extremely important here. Who moves first between this Urshifu and this Regidrago, regardless?
Yes. And more than likely, the Urshifu is the one you would expect to move first due to having a higher base speed, but some Urshifus, especially these Mystic Water ones recently, have been trained to be significantly slower. Also important to note, this Regidrago is the Dragon Terra type, so at least from Ben's side, there's not much to worry about in terms of being able to target it. You can just click that close combat to be able to do a solid amount of damage to Regidrago, and it cannot become a ghost type to sort of outsmart that. Now we do see Ben's Tornadus does move before Yutaro's Tornadus, and this close combat does come out, bringing Regidrago down to very low HP. Now we'll have to see what Regidrago goes for in retaliation as it clicks his Dragon Energy and does a small bit of damage to both. Definitely not as much as we might have been expecting that to do.
Yeah, still pretty serviceable damage into this Urshifu with the -1 from the close combat to its special defense. Very, very important speed interactions that we've learned there on turn 1, though. The Tornadus on Ben's side, faster than the Tornadus on Yutaro's side, and Urshifu faster than Regidrago, which just goes down there to the Bleak Windstorm from Ben's Overcloaked Tornadus.
And the Surging Strikes comes out before the Tornadus is able to move again, and that is doing enough damage to take out the Tornadus, leaving Ben at a pretty healthy 4-2 lead so far.
And it all just comes down to, in this Tailwind here, these Pokemon have been faster in this game 1. Yutaro did not even get a chance to get an attack off on turn 2, already forced to reveal those final 2 Pokemon. And just, like you mentioned, on such a fact that just from the number of resources, no chance of getting a second Tailwind upgrade in this game. And with the Chien-Pao, with the Urshifu, you know, sure, it's a Choice Scarf Urshifu on Yutaro's side, but what move are you able to lock into here that is going to help deal with this Urshifu and this Tornadus, plus 2 unknown Pokemon in the back?
Yeah, as we also have not been able to see what Ben's 2 other Pokemon are, so it'll be interesting to see sort of what comes out. He's considering this Terastallization of Tornadus maybe to get around some of these ice moves, as Yutaro's Chien-Pao is Ice Crash, Ice Shard, as well as Throat Shot, so it will have that priority Ice-type move just to make sure that it can do the damage. We will see the Urshifu on Yutaro's side coming out and going for this Water Terastallization to just guarantee as much damage as possible with the Surging Strikes.
Yep, and with this Terra Water, potentially with the -1 to the defense from the opposing Urshifu may be enough to pick that up. It's going to be Ice Shard plus Surging Strikes coming out, and you'd imagine, yeah, just Surging Strikes into that Urshifu, an extraordinarily aggressive play from Yutaro, but paying off in spades that turn, picking up a KO for essentially nothing.
Yeah, as we saw, and maybe that Ice Shard not mattering in the end, potentially, as that Surging Strikes might have been enough to be able to pick it up, but the Ice Shard just sort of to guarantee. It would have been interesting to see from Ben's side if we had seen that Aqua Jet come out, just to sort of beat out and get a little bit of damage, maybe break the sash on this Chien-Pao. However, now we see this Amoonguss and the Tornadus are just out in front of both of the 2 of them. And we see this Amoonguss is both in a pretty good spot against this Urshifu, but then feeling pretty threatened by this Chien-Pao, and we do know that Ben's Amoonguss is Terra Fire, so it can't even reliably terrastallize in front of them, lest it want to take a lot of damage from the Surging Strikes.
Yeah, and it's a pretty precarious position here for Yutaro because of the speed interaction between your Urshifu and your Chien-Pao. If the Chien-Pao were able to move first, you'd be able to get the attack off into the Amoonguss, and at worst spend 1 Surging Strike to pick that Pokemon up. But unfortunately, because the Urshifu moves first, it's going to be all 3 Surging Strikes, a pretty healthy amount of damage, all things considered, into this Amoonguss.
Yeah, this Urshifu will be left at just about 54%, if I'm doing my math correctly, right at the end due to all the Rocky Helmet chip, and we will see this Chien-Pao will be moving right after, clicking this Ice Will Crash into Amoonguss and guaranteed taking it out. And we'll have to see what this Tornadus ends up going for. If I had to assume, we'll be looking at a Bleak Wind coming out to both of these opposing Pokemon. However, will be able to hit. It does appear that one misses into the Urshifu. Quite important, because this Urshifu likely would have gone down to that Bleak Wind as we see the Tailwind peter out, and this last Pokemon being an Urshifu.
Being the
Or Chien-Pao, my apologies. shiny Qian Pao.
Shiny Chen Pao at that. Now, famously, Chen Pao does not love to stare down an Urshifu on the opposing side, but with the Sucker Punch available to Ben's Chen Pao, with Sword of Ruin, potentially that's enough. Now,
And a non-resistant attack into Urshifu, yes.
well, as I was going to say, Calvin, you know,
Yes.
it's the Urshifu's dropped its fighting type, you know, becomes the pure water type from Terastallization, is not going to resist that Sucker Punch.
Yes,
Maybe enough,
and
certainly would have been enough if that Bleakwind Storm had come.
yes, absolutely. It certainly would have been enough to clean it up. And we will see this Tortoise going for its Terastallization now into the Steel type to sort of give it a little bit more leeway in front of Yutaro's Qian Pao that does not have that fighting type move.
Yep, it is just going to be the throat chop on Chen Pao, and the Sucker
Ooh,
Punch
the Sucker
not
Punch is not
quite
enough to take out the Urshifu, as the Urshifu was able to go for Surging Strikes into the Qian Pao, and that will be enough to pick it up after all three of them land, bringing this Qian Pao down, and it will just be Tortoise against the world.
Yes, unfortunately for Yutaro, though, it still may not be enough depending on this Tornadus' eyesight, truly. You know, the Icicle Crash does not even connect into the Tornadus.
Not even giving a chance for the Bleakwind to flinch. However, the Bleakwind will also be missing. What will it miss into? It hits into the Urshifu, and now will just be Qian Pao versus the Tortoise. We'll have to see are there able to be enough Icicle Crash flinches or Bleakwind misses to get Yutaro there towards the end. However, this Tortoise, as June has just pointed out to me surreptitiously, she has noted that this Tortoise is Overcloak, so it never will be flinched. As we see this Icicle Crash do a solid amount of damage, but the Bleakwind Storm comes out and misses again!
Oh no. Just horrific if you're Ben's side, missing 3 out of, I think, 5 Bleakwind Storms, and now setting up an easy throat chop to finish off the game for Yutaro's Qian Pao. Both players a little bit in disbelief about the ending of that first game, and really, again, the Tailwind Mirror, you can't expect too much more than that kind of variance between these two teams.
Yeah, absolutely. And hey, call me both players because I'm also in disbelief completely. Just a truly interesting way for that endgame to go. Also, interesting that we saw Yutaro go for the Icicle Crash into the Tortoise there. And I think he and I realizing at the same time that the Tortoise was that Gopher Cloak item, not being able to be flinched, the throat chop being more damage in that situation.
Yeah, you just did see still plenty of damage from that Icicle Crash.
Definitely.
Well within range of the throat chop. I'm not convinced the throat chop would have been enough to just one-hit KO the Tornadus from that range.
No,
Anyways, you know,
definitely.
it would have needed 2 attacks regardless, but probably should still click the attack that can't miss.
Yeah,
You know, from those two.
as we saw.
But now both players back to the drawing board, and from Yutaro's side, I think still a lot of question marks coming out of that first game. You ended up being slower with both of your Pokemon on lead, put you into a position where you really needed to get pretty fortunate in that endgame to come out on top. How do you make those adjustments to avoid needing that situation again in Game 2?
Yeah, it will be very interesting to see, as we do see the Yutaro's team just as a whole does not have a lot that can swap into these Bleakwind Storms that Tortoise is able to put out and then subsequently miss. It will be doing a good bit of damage.
Yeah, we're getting a message from the producer, Gerd from Beyond the Stars, trying to pass us a calc for how much damage that throat chop may have done to the Tornadus.
Assuming the Tortoise did not have any bulk.
Assuming the Tornadus did not have any bulk, assuming the Chen Pao was jolly nature as opposed to an adamant nature, things that we just can't know at this point.
Exactly.
But we are going to see Ben run it back, Tornadus and Urshifu on his side, and then, to match that for Yutaro, the same Tornadus and Urshifu, just flip sides of the field.
Yep, we'll be seeing this classic Torn Urshi lead, as we noted in our first round as well. Torn Urshi, a very, very tried and true lead, and both players noted that as the same. However, on Yutaro's side, that Urshifu is Choice Scarf, so it will be the victor in terms of these Speed Wars. And we do see this taunt coming out from Ben's side onto the Tortoise to make sure that it cannot go for this Rain Dance or the Tailwind, as the Surging Strikes comes out and does a good bit of damage to this Tortoise, and we'll have to see if that is enough to pick it up, and it doesn't look like that will be so far. However, if we had gone for the Water Terastallization, it would have been.
Yep, or if Yutaro had been able to get the Rain Dance off on that side. Now, conversely, if Yutaro was able to click Rain Dance on that turn 1, it looks like the Mystic Water Urshifu on Ben's side would have also been able to pick up the KO on his Tornadus. So maybe a blessing in disguise that you're not able, you ended up ended up getting taunted by the Tornadus that we found out in Game 1 was faster between the two, but now we're in this very sticky situation where Ben is still able to click Tailwind this turn, give himself the speed advantage, but Yutaro just limited to clicking something along those lines of Bleak Wind Storm, or, like we're seeing on Ben's side, switching the Tornadus out to try to keep it safe for the rest of the game, as that is what we're going to see.
Both Tornadus is swapping out to make sure they will be able to click Tailwind later on in this game. And some interesting conversations about the bulk on both those Tornaduses that we were able to see from those interactions, as the Choice Scarfed Urshifu did more damage to Ben's Tornadus than the Mystic Water Urshifu did to Yutaro's Tornadus, implying that Yutaro's Tornadus is bulkier than Ben's, despite all of those interactions. However, the Rocky Helmet chip coming out of this Urshifu will bring it down to just about half, as we saw before, as this Chien Pao is coming out instead of the Tornadus on Yutaro's side, as we will see the Surging Strikes come into that slot and will be doing good amounts of damage to this Chien Pao. Will that be enough to pick it up? It looks like it will be very close on that roll, doing just enough to take out this Chien Pao.
Yeah, usually a Mystic Water Urshifu will be able to pick up the Focus Sash Chien Pao on the other side with just one round of Surging Strikes. Not always guaranteed. There are Mystic Water Urshifus that are not as invested in their attack. There are Chien Paos that will invest pretty heavily in their defenses specifically for that. But with losing the Chien Pao and with the Tornadus being so low, it looks very, very difficult for Yutaro at this position, especially because of this Amoonguss, the key difference between these two teams thus far in this match.
Yeah, absolutely. We will see the interesting, Ben does have an interesting opportunity to sort of pin this Tornadus into clicking this Tailwind, as he could just go for the Aqua Jet, where if he did go for the Blink Wind, that Aqua Jet would go beforehand. But Ben not going for the Rage Powder here, not redirecting the Surging Strikes over, being able to take advantage of that pin, as I noted, sort of being able to guarantee this Amoonguss will not be going down to a Bleak Wind on this turn, and will be able to be able to get its potential Spore off. As the Surging Strikes from Ben's side is able to take out Yutaro's Tornadus, this will be now 2 Pokemon for Yutaro, and if I'm not mistaken, with this Amoonguss, it looks like this Urshifu will be going to sleep.
Now, could always be a Sludge Bomb into that slot. You never know for sure until the move's been clicked, but the Spore pretty safe coming out there. The only thing Yutaro could have possibly switched in was maybe that Rillaboom to soak up the Spore.
And that's if he brings it.
But that's even, exactly.
As we see, the last Pokemon is Regidrago.
Which, the Regidrago could be pretty valuable at this position.
Yeah.
Ben has not been able to get Tailwind up on his side. The Regidrago going to be able to click a full power, or at least mostly full power, Dragon Energy. Could be an Aqua Jet into that slot. And I would think that from this range on both Pokemon, especially seeing how physically defensive this Amoonguss has been, a Dragon Energy from full HP may just be enough to pick up the double KO. Give Yutaro the chance to burn a turn of sleep on this Choice Scarf Urshifu, which, at this point, probably good that it's asleep.
Yeah.
So it's not going to take another round of Rocky Helmet recoil. And
as we see the Dragon Terrestrialization come out from this Regidrago to really put the fear into Ben's Pokemon and make sure this Dragon Energy will be able to do as much damage as possible.
yeah, truly as strong of an attack as you can ever see from a Regidrago. No Aqua Jet coming out from Ben's side. The Urshifu for Yutaro does stay asleep, and Dragon Energy, again, I'd imagine, should be enough to pick up this Urshifu, even if it's one of the bulkier Mystic Water Dragons.
Yep, as we see, that Dragon Energy probably does enough to take out this Urshifu, maybe even 2 times over at that point, depending on its special defense and HP investment. But now we do see this Chien Pao come back out, and it will be able to threaten this Sucker Punch into the Regidrago slot, but it is equally just as threatened by this Urshifu. So we'll have to see sort of how Yutaro treats this turn. Will he hope that his Urshifu wakes up so that it can go for these Surging Strikes, or does he hope it stays asleep so that it doesn't get hit by this Rocky Helmet?
I think you have to hope that the Urshifu stays asleep this turn, but unfortunately it will wake up. We'll take 3 more hits of Rocky Helmet, bring it down just above fainting. No, it should be, at the very least, under 10% of its HP. The issue, though, is that this Chien Pao does have the Focus Sash item, so while this Regidrago will be able to get a lot of damage off into it, it will never be able to pick up the one-hit KO with this Dragon Energy, and I don't have high hopes for this Regidrago. And its chances against an Ice Spinner coming out from the Qianpao.
And yeah, something important that I was going to note is that this Qianpao on Ben's side is Ice Spinner, so no chance this Ice Spinner is able to miss against this Regidrago. This will be guaranteed damage coming out, and this will be a good amount of damage coming out into this Regidrago, picking up the KO, leaving Yutaro with just a very sliver of HP on this Urshifu against a Qianpao and a Tornadus, and it looks like this will be our game 2 wrapped up.
And now, to be fair, only 39 hit points combined between the Tornadus and the Qianpao. Pretty good position, generally speaking, but, with that little HP remaining on your Urshifu, it does not matter. Even if you resist that Sucker Punch still, it's going to be more than enough. And take us to, I think, a pretty well-deserved Game 3 here in this set.
Yeah, I think this will be a very interesting Game 3, despite the fact that Game 1 sort of came down to a few of those Bleak Wind and Icicle Crash turns going in different favors for each of our different players. I think we'll have to see how in Game 3 they sort of keep adapting, because we saw the adaptations going into Game 2 already pretty significant, as we saw that Regidrago was, instead of being a lead piece, piece in the back to sort of offer some cleanup potential. We'll have to see going into Game 3 how each of these Pokemon are being treated on Yutaro's side. This super offensive team with so many pieces that just really threaten a lot of damage into Ben's entire team. We'll have to see what Ben sort of is able to do to potentially counter the lead that Yutaro decides to go for.
Yeah, and I think, it really is on Yutaro to make some of these adjustments just because of the speed interactions that we've seen so far. A hyper offense team like this, you're not used to being slower with your Pokemon, but the Regidrago being slower than the Urshifu, your Tornadus being slower than the opposing Taunt Tornadus is a massive interaction here. I would be pretty surprised to see Yutaro lead his own Tornadus again just because of that interaction.
As would I.
Could see something along the lines of the Qianpao and the Urshifu. Potentially it's time for Rillaboom to make its appearance in this battle. But we are going to see, once it comes back out, and
there's the Rillaboom!
There's the Rillaboom and the Qianpao for Yutaro's side, staring down the Tornadus and Urshifu for Ben, and I think this is where you can start to assert actually some real control over the board position if you are Yutaro.
Yeah, and this very tiny Rillaboom coming out on Yutaro's side looks very small in comparison to this Qianpao, smaller than I'm used to seeing in terms of Rillabooms, but Qianpao and Rillaboom are often the more forgotten partners that go alongside this Torn or Urshi a lot of the time. We see these pretty common 4 Pokemon do a lot together and they cover each other very, very well offensively and are able to take things out. But we see this Amoonguss swap in for the Urshifu, as this Amoonguss won't be threatened by this Rillaboom in the slightest, as Ben's own Tornadus decides to go for the Steel Terrestrialization to make sure that it's not threatened by the Icicle Crash, and it still maintains its resistance to all of Rillaboom's Grass-type moves.
And you can see just how much pressure this Qianpao provides being led in this matchup, forcing not only the Terrestrialization on Tornadus, which, wow, that's a lot of damage, but forcing even the Urshifu to switch out into an Amoonguss that, shockingly, is not going to be able to Terrestrialize in this matchup. This Qianpao is going to get at least one more attack off in this game, as we get a little bit of a glimpse into the speed interactions here. Just looking at the order in which these Pokemon do heal from the grassy terrain, all of them being grounded now after Tornadus becomes a pure Steel type.
Yeah, exactly, and we will have to see what Yutaro decides to go for here. Will he decide to take out this Amoonguss with one of these Ice-type moves into the slot where it will be guaranteed to take one of these Ice-type moves? Or will we see him maybe choose to protect this Qianpao and hope that it doesn't go down to the potential Bleak Wind that Ben could go for?
Yeah, it's a really tricky spot from Ben's side, I think. And really it's the first time all set that Ben has been on the back foot, especially early in either of these games. Just because of the fact that he had to burn the Terrestrialization so early, and now you're flicking Rage Powder with a Grass-type Amoonguss in front of a Qianpao. Not always recipe for success. The Icicle Crash with just that little bit of chip from Fake Out on turn 1 is enough to pick up the KO on the Amoonguss.
Good bit of damage as we see this Tornadus go for the Bleak Wind and connection to both slots. And Yutaro, as we've been saying multiple times I think throughout the set, Yutaro brought down to just 2 Pokemon at the same time. A lot of the time, his very offensive team has been sort of making the tempo plays to be able to get in positions where he's able to bring in 2 Pokemon at the same time that are able to be so much of a threat to Ben's team. So it'll be interesting to see what happens here. So with the Regidrago coming out and the other Pokemon will be this Tornadus, so we will see both Tornadus on either side, and as we know from before, as we know from Game 1, this is not a great situation for Yutaro to be in, as Tornadus, both of Ben's Pokemon are faster than their partners on Yutaro's side.
Yeah, and we even saw that the Urshifu on Ben's side is still faster than the Tornadus on Yutaro's side. I'm very, very surprised to not see the Urshifu come back for Game 3 for Yutaro, especially knowing that we've already seen the fourth Pokemon, you know, just a little sneak preview of it on Ben's side. It's really looking like a very strong position for Ben, as long as he is just able to get his Tailwind up this turn, keep the speed orders in check, and allow, just any amount of damage to hit the field here.
Yeah, exactly. As we see the Dragon Terrestrialization come out on this Regidrago again, just really trying to make sure he can do as much damage as possible. Ben goes for this Tailwind, and we'll have to see if Yutaro goes to match it or if he will decide to go for the Bleakwind. Yutaro not going for the Tailwind to try and beat out. We'll be trying to stagger these Tailwinds as we see the close combat go into Regidrago and do just about 75% once again as Yutaro's Bleakwind dodges on the Tornadus, but we will see the Urshifu goes down to the Bleakwind, and this Regidrago will be free to be able to click one of its moves. Will it be going for Earth Power to hit this Tornadus, or will it be trying to go for Dragon Energy? Now this will be weakened significantly due to its lower HP. We'll have to see if it's enough with single target, and it's not enough to pick up this Tornadus. Just not enough damage to be able to do the last little bit of chip. But I think Yutaro uncertain in that situation if the Bleakwind would have been enough to pick up on Ben's Urshifu.
Yeah, you would have to imagine that the Bleakwind Storm, especially after the close combat drops its special defense, it's going to be more than enough. With the Sharp Beak on your Tornadus, if you are Yutaro, should be more than enough to pick up this Urshifu. But again, some Mystic Water Urshifus are going to be extraordinarily defensive. You can never be quite sure. The big issue here, though, is that you've got a Chien-Pao with its Focus Sash intact. Both of your Pokemon are slower. And both Pokemon are weak to this Ice Spinner that's going to come out from the Chien-Pao with really no recourse.
Yeah, and Yutaro's Tornadus being this Ghost Terrestrialization didn't really offer it any form of play around with this Chien-Pao. Going into the Ghost Terrestrialization would just mean that it's weak to that Sucker Punch and still getting hit by a super effective move. And if it had been that Steel Terrestrialization, maybe in a little bit of a better spot in this endgame. But it does look like this Chien-Pao is just so dominant on the field right now.
Yeah, there's, at least in my mind, there shouldn't be much that Yutaro can do to get out of this position. It's a taunt coming out into that Tornadus, not going to offer up a Tailwind here. And the Ice Spinner guaranteed into this Regidrago that just protected last turn. Turns it into a 1 versus 2 with a Tornadus on Yutaro's side that I think just won't even be able to pick up a single KO, given the Steel typing on the opposing Tornadus, plus the Focus Sash on the Chien-Pao.
Yeah, just so much damage threatened by both of these Pokemon, frankly, and this Ice Spinner will just barely not be enough to be able to pick it up. This Bleakwind coming out immediately after will be enough to take out the Tornadus and end this Game 3 that we've seen. Now, what a great set from both players. What a wonderful time that we've gotten to watch all of these games. See these adaptations as we've gone, because Games 2 and 3, significant changes from both players in terms of how they played it and how they led going into those games. Yutaro, Game 3, deciding to lead two completely separate Pokemon that he had been leading from the prior two games.
Yeah, and bringing the Rillaboom for the first time all set to lead in that Game 3 looked like a very strong position. But again, it really was just that Amoonguss buying that 1 or 2 extra turns for Ben, allowing him to get the pace in that game, set up his own Tailwind, taunt the opposing Tornadus, and just cleaning up with the Chien-Pao in the end game. Very, very well paced out play from Ben. And again, another 2 players who I'm very excited to see what they can do the rest of this tournament. A very fast-paced, exciting best of 3 that we just got to witness.
Absolutely, and I hope that we get to see both of them play on later in the day. I think that was a wonderful game, and I am very excited to see what the rest of them do with the rest of their experience here at Balance Patch.